Welcome to the first episode of Faithful Provocations. I'm delighted that we can talk, discern, discuss, disagree, and find our way forward in faithful provocations. Today we look at the question of war from the perspective of women. What's going on here? We know the debate has gone on in the last week with Pope Leo and Mr. Trump in some global discussion about peace. It hasn't gone very far, majorly because Pope Leo has not engaged and because Mr. Trump has a notoriously short attention span. What's going on, however, is a war. And what goes on, especially for women and children in war, is a very serious question of faith.
We cannot just let the men, whether they are the president or the pope, speak for all of us. As women, as theologians, as intellectuals, we really need to speak in the public sphere.
We have to change also the way in which religion is understood. If you look at the Latin word, it means link, make connections, create ways of being together. That's what religions do, which are different, in fact, elements than even spirituality. And that's why I wonder, as we contrast this week the visit of Sarah Malali to the Vatican to talk with Pope Leo, she has already put out a very strong statement in support of his view of war. But even a woman in that position going may take away from the notion that it's really communities of people, groups of religious people, whether it's denominations or base communities. It's groups of people who are connected, moving in this direction of peace and nonviolence.
Mary adds that the Church of England is the established church, meaning that the church is part of the establishment. It has been that before, it is still now, whether you have a male or a female as the Archbishop of Canterbury. So yes, she represents the Church of England and she is the spiritual head of the Anglican Communion. That is why she is a very important symbol for me as an Episcopalian. But I agree with you. We cannot rely on one single person or figurehead to speak for the world's 90 million Anglicans and Episcopalians. We need to share our view, and especially grassroots movement and women need to share what we are concerned about.
Yes, to that end, I must say I was very impressed with her comment, and I quote, "As innocent people are killed and displaced, families torn apart, futures destroyed, the human cost of war is incalculable. The calling of every Christian and of all people of faith and goodwill to work and pray for peace." So I see this as moving in the direction of the kind of nonviolence work that many Catholic women, especially Catholic women in religious communities, have taken on. We've stopped trying to twist ourselves into theological pretzels over a just war theory, which isn't very helpful. But we've really claimed and I think taken hold of nonviolence, not just as a fringe kind of thing for a few people, but really as the normative way in which we try to approach human relationships. And so I look at groups like the Sisters of Mercy, the Adrian Dominican Sisters, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, among many who have made very strong statements against the U.S. war in Iran in recent weeks and in favor of nonviolence. The Leadership Conference of Women Religious, which is the presidents of the religious communities, essentially, went to Rome and certainly has made their statement as well. Pax Christi, one of the Catholic groups, which now has an ecumenical flavor, of course, has largely women in leadership. And they have been producing not only documents, but also proposals for developing studies of nonviolence. Not studies of the just war theory, but studies of nonviolence. So I think these kinds of women, as well as their efforts, they live stream, by the way, a prayer and contemplation. Nancy Sylvester has a regular practice of contemplation for women and men to engage in online, moving in this direction. She's been doing this since the Ukraine war broke out. Earlier discussions that have seen peace as the end, as a kind of fringe area, I think have not been very helpful. But these serious efforts at seeing the philosophy and the theology of nonviolence have been enormously helpful. And notice they do not emerge out of one leader, but from communities.
Within the Episcopal Church, I am glad to share that some of the lay women are pushing the leaders of the church to speak out more or more sharply and clearly against the war, and saying that this is not just. And there is also an Episcopal Peace Fellowship that is an umbrella organization with many people joining in this peace building effort. And since the Vietnam War, the Episcopal Church has also a very strong tradition of helping the conscientious objectors and saying that they should be supported if out of their conscience and they cannot go to war. So there is also this kind of movement going on. And coming from our Asian tradition, of course, we remember Gandhi, the proponents for nonviolence. And we also remember the late Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. But in addition to these male leaders, we also have sisters, and we have nuns, and we have lay women pushing for a peace. Because, as you may recall, before the U.S. was involved in all these wars in the Middle East, the theater of war was between U.S. and Asia.
Yeah.
You recall that the colonization of the Philippines, and then the involvement in the war in China and in Korea, and of course, Vietnam. So we have been thinking about building peace and building a culture of just peace for some time among Asian and Asian American feminists.
Yes, this is so important. The Catholic Peace Fellowship certainly has been a part of it. The Fellowship of Reconciliation has been an umbrella group to help. And in my tradition, Dorothy Day, of course, looms large as the co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement and one of the people who has made peace the cornerstone of her work. And that was a very fringe movement. It continues to be a very fringe movement, now being taken with greater and greater seriousness as soup kitchens and food pantries and so forth proliferate around the country. You remind me, too, to look ahead, Quilon, in terms of what we could imagine will happen with the current administration and this bellicose environment that they have created. And I look to the draft, and I am very worried about the reinstatement of the draft. There is no draft at the moment, but there is the requirement of registration for young men at the age of 18. In December, that requirement of registration will not be lifted. It'll be made automatic. This is a very serious use of technology now, that it will not be that a young person has to inscribe himself, but in fact, he will be inscribed automatically by virtue of his Social Security number, which is, of course, public record for the government. Technology favors war, and I think what we need to think about is how technology can favor peace. I also wonder if in a fit of what I would call faux equality, women will be put under the draft as well. And that will raise another host of issues because the women in the military have advised us about how difficult that is. So if we move in that direction, religious groups that are providing for conscientious objectors will simply have men and women on their hands, and our other trans and non-binary siblings as well. So this is something to keep an eye on and for religious people to begin to prepare for.
So as an ethicist, Mary, I want to ask you, we have been fighting for equality between men and women. Now you have the draft, and both women and men would be drafted on an equal basis, supposedly, and women can be put in combat too. What do you think? Is this really full equality? Now we have equality of the sexes. Both are responsible to, in quotation mark, defend your country.
This is a very sticky wicket, I think. I have followed this for 50 years. My friend Sue Fulton was in the first class of women who went to and graduated from West Point. And they're now celebrating their 5th year. And I think we have to understand what has happened with women in the military as a way of thinking about equality. And I contrast it with what's happened with Catholic women in priesthood. Women are now in all ranks of the military. No women are ordained in the Catholic Church. Fundamentally, I think the reasons are the same, that the women in the military have equality, but it's very precarious. And I think that the same question of whether women should be drafted is at stake here. That if women are drafted, will this improve things or overall, or will it cause problems? And I think that women in the military have not improved the military, qua military. We still have wars, lots of them. But we also have dead women. We have women who come back from this war dead. And I think this is a question of whether we want to see fundamental change or incremental change. And if we want incremental change, then The draft for women is certainly something that can be entertained, and I think many people, including feminists, will say it must be. On the other hand, I always say to my friend Brenda Fulton, excuse me, but in the final analysis, your goals have not changed. You're still fighting wars. But we, women who have not been ordained, have made a very different church. And so that's how I look at it. The difference between whether equality is something on its face or equality is something that takes us to a new place. And so I would oppose the draft for everyone, just as I oppose the ordination of everyone, not because we want simply people to be equal. We want things to be different. Now, that may be seen as a utopian view, but I think from a strategic point of view, it's very important to keep in front of us.
Mary, you may know that I came from the Diocese of Hong Kong. It was the Diocese of Hong Kong that first ordained a woman to be priest in the whole worldwide Anglican Communion. That was 1944. Florence Lithium Oil was the women first ordained. And then when I was a teenager, I witnessed my own rector, Reverend Wang Xinyuan, who was ordained more officially than in 1971. So I carry with me this great tradition. Watching this struggle of women's ordination, I sometimes have very ambivalent feelings. On the one hand, I of course celebrate women can be ordained. I think those women who want to be and who are called by God to be priests should be allowed to be ordained. But on the other hand, I have not seen much changes in a very patriarchal church because the structure, the liturgy are still very male-dominated. So I applaud your many decades effort pushing for women's ordination, but you just said women have created a different church. Now tell me, what is this shape of the church that Catholic women have created?
This is precisely the question that's being asked by Catholics at this 50-year anniversary mark, with a big conference coming up next month. And the issue is that we have not made one bit of difference in terms of the institutional church. Women are not ordained as deacons. They're not ordained as presbyters, as priests. They are now put into certain administrative capacities, which are absolutely unrelated to jurisdiction, to being able to make decisions, to being able to decide how money is spent. But these questions of ordination have been the focus. I think the focus has to be and needs to be on feminist ministry. How do the ministries get done? It's like looking at the war. In the war situation, we're looking at people who are injured, who are dead, people who are moved forcibly, many new migrants. This dire situation to look at is the people who are affected. So what happens in the ministry? In the ministry of the Catholic Church, we have seen an epidemic of clergy sexual abuse. We have seen very serious lowering of the quality, I would say, of theological education and preparation for many of our priests. And we have seen women move in very different directions. Even people like me working at a nonprofit, functioning as a theologian in an educational setting. We have moved into base communities. The movement of Roman Catholic women priests and the Association of Roman Catholic women priests now have several hundred women ordained around the world, who function not as leaders of tall steeple churches, but as animators of base communities and of priests in those situations for people who want sacraments that they think have to be connected to ordained priesthood. So there's so much work to do here to dismantle the notions of clericalism. I celebrate what has happened with women in many denominations being ordained, but I also take serious issue with the fact that it has brought about large-scale social change. I don't see it. And that's why I'll be very interested to see how your own Archbishop does in terms of bringing this message of peace, but from a slightly different, but not all that different perspective. And that's where the question I go back to is, if religions are not about individuals, but about groups and communities linked together, then in fact, it becomes incumbent upon us to have a very different discussion than what does the Archbishop of Canterbury or what does the Pope say about anything. It's how are we educating people, and how are people educating themselves and one another in a variety of settings to move in the direction of nonviolence.
I also have high hopes for this visit to the Vatican. As you may know that the Pope and the Archbishop of Canterbury have not met until in modern times. And once we have established the connection, so you have this periodical visit to the Vatican. I certainly hope the first female Archbishop of Canterbury going to the Vatican will create some kind of stir, not only in the Catholic Church, but also in the Episcopal Church. Because as you know that, in the Anglican Communion, there are also conservative male bishops who do not think we should have a woman, or we are ready to have a woman as the Archbishop of Canterbury. Let us hope that Archbishop Sarah will bring the voices of women, the voices of the people wounded because she has been a nurse in her former career, and the voices of those people who are on the underside of history because their voices have not been heard enough. And I applaud her for standing up for the innocent, for the victims, and for those who suffered because of the war. As a nurse, she has seen the suffering and the tragedy and the traumas herself. And I hope this will be something she will bring to the conversation and to the future ministry of the Church.
I'm betting on her on this, but my question is really very pointed. And my question is, will it be easier for Roman and Anglican leaders to agree on a way forward in terms of peace and nonviolence than it will be for them to agree on questions of sex and gender in the Church? That's really an interesting point, because if it's easier to agree on the secular issues, the churches are really in trouble. Because I think by comparison, the questions of sex and gender, and here the LGBTQ questions that the Anglican Church in certain places has been more forward on, of course, than Roman Catholicism almost anywhere, and the questions of the women's ordination, both diaconate and presbyterate. But if church leaders can't figure those things out at home, how much credibility should we give them? Not do they have, but should we give them in the global arena? Talk about a faithful provocation.
Indeed. Let us wait and see what happened. I like this question. That is, can they agree on peace and nonviolence, whereas they cannot agree on gender and sexuality?
And if that's what happens, how should we trust them on the questions of war and peace?
Please join us next Friday for the second Provocations.